The grand music hall was full that evening. The golden chandeliers glowed softly, and the polished floor reflected the light like a mirror. People dressed in elegant suits and gowns filled the rows of seats, whispering to one another with excitement and curiosity. They had all come to witness something unusual, something many thought was impossible. At the center of the stage stood Maestro Laurent, a man known across the country for his sharp tongue and even sharper standards. He was a legend in the world of music, a man who believed that true mastery could only come through strict discipline and flawless technique. His dark eyes scanned the audience as if daring anyone to question his authority. He had trained countless students, but very few ever met his expectations. On this night, however, it wasn't one of his star students standing beside him. It was a small girl, no older than 12, wearing a light blue dress that brushed against her knees. Her name was Elena. Her brown hair was neatly tied back with a ribbon, and her white gloves shimmered under the light. But what caught everyone's attention wasn't her dress or her size. It was the blindfold wrapped carefully around her eyes. A hush fell over the room. The sight of a blindfolded child standing in front of a grand piano looked strange, almost wrong. Some people in the audience whispered softly to each other. "What's she doing?" One man muttered. "Is this some kind of joke?" Another woman asked under her breath. The maestro lifted a hand for silence. His deep voice filled the hall. "Tonight," he said, "we shall see what happens when courage meets the impossible. This young girl claims she can perform one of Chopin's most difficult pieces without seeing a single note." A few people gasped. Others laughed quietly, thinking it was a trick. The maestro continued, his expression calm but clearly skeptical. "If she succeeds, I will admit that I was wrong to doubt her. But if she fails," he paused, his voice firm, "then perhaps she will learn that talent without discipline is meaningless." Elena stood still, her small hands clasped in front of her. She could feel the audience's eyes on her, judging, waiting, doubting. But she didn't flinch. Inside, her heart raced like a drum. Her palms were sweaty under her gloves, but she refused to wipe them. She wanted to appear calm, strong, confident, even though she was terrified. She had practiced for months for this moment. Every day after school, she would sit at the old piano in her house and play for hours, even when her mother told her to rest. The piano had belonged to her father, a kind man who used to play lullabies for her before bedtime. He had passed away 2 years ago, and since then, music had become her only way to feel close to him again. She played blindfolded because her father once told her, "Music doesn't live in your eyes, my little star. It lives in your heart." When Maestro Laurent heard about this strange practice, he had laughed. "A blindfolded pianist?" He scoffed. "That's a circus act, not music." But when Elena's teacher insisted on letting her perform, he agreed, partly to prove her wrong. He didn't believe in luck or emotion. To him, music was about precision and control, not feelings. Now, standing on the stage beside the little girl, he felt a strange curiosity mixed with irritation. He looked at her and said softly, "Are you sure you're ready?" "Yes, maestro," Elena replied, her voice quiet but steady. He studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Very well. Let the challenge begin." The hall grew so silent that even the faint hum of the chandelier lights could be heard. Elena slowly walked toward the grand piano at the center of the stage. Her steps were careful, almost hesitant. A young assistant guided her by the arm until she reached the bench. She sat down, her feet barely touching the floor. For a few seconds, she just sat there, breathing deeply. The smooth wooden surface of the piano felt warm under her hands. She could sense the weight of hundreds of eyes watching her every move. Somewhere in the audience, someone whispered, "She's going to fail." Elena heard it, but instead of breaking her focus, it made her stronger. She placed her hands gently on the keys, feeling their familiar texture. In her mind, she could already see the notes even though her eyes were covered. Every key was like a star in a map she had memorized by heart. Maestro Laurent crossed his arms and looked down at her. "Begin," he said simply. Elena didn't move right away. She took one more deep breath and remembered her father's words. "Play with your soul, not your sight." The hall seemed to disappear around her. The audience, the lights, the doubts all faded away until only the piano remained. Her fingers hovered over the keys, trembling slightly. And then, with a soft but sure touch, she pressed the first note. It was a small sound, but it echoed across the entire hall like a spark in the dark. The maestro didn't say anything. His face remained unreadable, though his eyes followed every movement of her hands. Elena continued, playing the opening chord slowly, carefully, as if testing the air. No one in the audience made a sound. The woman who had whispered earlier now leaned forward in her seat. The man beside her stopped breathing for a moment. Even the children in the back rows were silent. Something about the way the girl touched the piano was different. Gentle but full of emotion, like she was speaking to someone far away. The maestro's lips tightened. He didn't expect her to start this confidently. He told himself it wouldn't last, that soon she would stumble or hit a wrong key. But deep down, something inside him, something he hadn't felt in years, started to stir. Elena didn't notice him. Her fingers moved slowly, then faster, finding their rhythm. She wasn't just playing notes. She was telling a story of love, loss, and courage, and as the melody grew stronger, even the maestro couldn't deny it anymore. The challenge he had created to expose her weakness might instead reveal his own. The large golden hall was filled with quiet whispers. The chandelier lights reflected off the marble floor, creating hundreds of little stars that danced around the room. Students, teachers, and guests waited for the moment to begin. But most of them were not looking at the piano. They were looking at the small girl standing beside it. Her name was Elena, and she was only 12. Her thin fingers fidgeted nervously with the edge of her blue dress. The blindfold covering her eyes looked almost too big for her small face. Behind her, the famous Maestro Laurent stood with a calm but skeptical expression. His black tuxedo fit perfectly, and his eyes held the sharpness of someone who had seen many talented students come and go. "She's too young," someone in the audience whispered. "And blindfolded? That's ridiculous," another added quietly. The sound of murmuring filled the space like a breeze through dry leaves. The maestro didn't say a word. He just folded his hands behind his back and watched Elena. He had been teaching for more than 30 years, and he believed in perfection. He believed music needed discipline, control, and sight. The idea that a child blindfolded could play one of the most difficult piano pieces in front of an audience seemed like a cruel joke to him when the academy director had told him about Elena's request to perform blindfolded. He had laughed at first. "Let her try," he said, amused. "She'll learn that talent without vision is nothing." But now, standing in front of her, he wasn't amused anymore. There was something strangely determined about her stillness. Elena could hear the whispers. Every word reached her ears. Her heart thumped so loudly she feared people could hear it. But she didn't let her fear show. She took a slow breath and reminded herself of why she was here. It wasn't to impress anyone. It wasn't even to win the maestro's approval. She wanted to prove something to herself, that she could still play for her father even if she couldn't see the notes. At the edge of the stage, her mother stood quietly, her hands clutched together. Her eyes were full of both pride and worry. She knew what this moment meant to her daughter. Music was the last connection Elena had with her late father, a pianist who had taught her every song she knew before he passed away in a car accident 2 years ago. "Do you really believe she can do this?" one of the teachers whispered to another. "I don't know, but Maestro Laurent looks ready to stop her the moment she makes a mistake," came the soft reply. The maestro slowly stepped closer to the piano. He leaned slightly toward her and said in a voice low enough that only she could hear, "You don't have to do this, child. It's not shameful to step back." Elena turned her head in the direction of his voice. Her voice was steady but quiet. "Sir, you said music is about feeling, not just playing the right keys." "I want to feel it." The maestro paused. He didn't reply. For a brief second, something flickered in his eyes. Maybe respect, maybe irritation. He straightened his back and turned toward the crowd. "Very well," he said loudly. "We will begin." The audience fell silent immediately. The tension in the air was heavy enough to touch. Elena took one more breath. Somewhere deep inside, she wished her father could be there. She remembered his voice telling her, "When you can't see, listen harder. The world will sing for you." Her fingers trembled slightly as she reached for the piano keys. But before she could start, a boy from the back row muttered under his breath, "She's going to fail. Just wait." The words hit her like a sharp pin in the heart, but instead of breaking her focus, they strengthened it. Her lips pressed into a determined line. She whispered softly to herself, "We'll see." She whispered softly to herself, "We'll see." The maestro tapped the baton once on his palm and nodded for her to begin. But before the first note came, a loud cough broke the silence. A man in the front row chuckled quietly. The tension in the room turned to discomfort. It was clear that most people expected to witness a disaster. Elena could sense every pair of eyes staring at her, waiting for her to mess up. The room felt too big, the lights too bright, and the air too thin. She almost took off her blindfold, almost. But then she remembered how her father would guide her tiny fingers across the piano keys, whispering, "You don't play to be perfect. You play to be heard." That memory gave her courage. She adjusted her hands, feeling for middle C. Her fingertips brushed the smooth ivory surface. The crowd leaned forward. Even the maestro's expression softened slightly, though he still looked doubtful. "Go on," he said quietly. Elena didn't respond. She didn't need to. She simply nodded once, inhaled deeply, and let the world around her disappear. The whispers, the stares, the golden hall, all of it faded away. There was only her, the piano, and the faint echo of her father's laughter in her heart. The maestro stepped back, his eyes still on her, his mind replaying her words, "I want to feel it." He had heard hundreds of students say they loved music, but never with such quiet certainty. For the first time that evening, he wasn't entirely sure what was about to happen. And then, as the audience held their breath, Elena's fingers pressed the first key. The sound of whispers slowly faded as Elena sat at the grand piano. The hall was still heavy with expectation. Her small fingers rested gently on the smooth ivory keys, feeling the cool surface beneath her gloves. She didn't press a single note yet. She was just breathing, listening to the silence. To her, that silence was part of the music. The blindfold covered her eyes completely, leaving her in darkness. But this darkness didn't frighten her anymore. She had practiced like this for months. It had started one night at home when she accidentally dropped the lights while practicing. Instead of panicking, she had kept playing, realizing she could still see the piano through her memory and touch. From that moment, she knew she didn't need her eyes to play. She needed her heart. Now, sitting on the stage, she took a deep breath. She could hear people shifting in their seats, clearing their throats, whispering quietly. Somewhere a woman coughed. It all felt so loud against the quiet of her mind, but she tried to block it out, just like she had learned to ignore the city sounds outside her home when practicing. In her mind, she pictured her father's face. He was smiling at her as he always did when she played for him. His voice echoed softly in her memory. "When you sit at the piano, let the world disappear. It's just you and the song." She adjusted her hands carefully, making sure she was centered on the piano. Her fingertips brushed over the keys, middle C, F, G, just to feel her position. Every pianist has their own little ritual before they begin, and this was hers. Maestro Laurent stood a few steps away, arms crossed, watching her every move. His expression was unreadable, but inside he was curious. He wanted to see what this blindfolded child would do next. He didn't believe in feeling music. He believed in control. But as he watched her slow, calm preparation, something inside him began to stir. She didn't look nervous. She looked ready. Elena could sense his gaze on her. She straightened her back and placed her left foot on the soft pedal. The familiar click of the mechanism comforted her. It was a sound she had heard thousands of times. She smiled faintly, but just as she was about to begin, a wave of doubt washed over her. What if she missed a key? What if she disappointed her father's memory? What if everyone laughed? Her throat tightened. She wanted to remove the blindfold, to see the piano, to see her mother's face in the crowd. Then she remembered her last conversation with her mother before the performance. They had been in the dressing room backstage. Her mother had knelt down beside her and said softly, "Elena, don't try to prove anything to them. Just play like you always do at home. Close your eyes, feel your father beside you, and let your heart do the rest." Her mother's words echoed now like a gentle melody. Elena took another deep breath and whispered to herself, "It's just home. It's just me and Dad." She placed both hands firmly on the keys. The smooth surface felt comforting now, like an old friend's hand. The maestro's voice broke the silence. "Are you ready, child?" "Yes," she answered simply. Her calm voice surprised him. Most students hesitated, trembled, or asked for a moment more. But she sounded sure. He gave a small nod. "Then begin when you're ready." Elena didn't rush. She waited another few seconds, letting her heart beat slow. In her mind, she could hear the opening notes of Chopin's Nocturne. Soft, sad, beautiful. She imagined the notes as falling raindrops, each one delicate and pure. She started to move her fingers, not pressing yet, just hovering. Her body swayed slightly, in rhythm with a song that existed only in her imagination. To anyone watching, it looked as if she was already lost in the music before it even began. In the audience, a young student leaned forward, whispering to her friend, "She's so calm." "I'd be shaking," her friend shrugged. "She's probably pretending. She'll freeze the moment she starts." But Maestro Laurent didn't speak. He was studying her closely. He had seen hundreds of students over the years, but there was something different about this one. It wasn't confidence, it was peace. A strange, quiet peace that made him uncomfortable because he had never felt it himself. Elena shifted slightly on the bench. She tilted her head, listening to the air, to the piano, to something invisible. Her blindfold hid her expression, but a small smile appeared on her lips. Suddenly, a sharp sound came from the back of the hall. A chair scraped the floor. A man had stood up to leave, muttering, "This is ridiculous. Let's go." His footsteps echoed toward the exit. Elena froze for a moment, startled, but then she remembered her father's advice. The world will always make noise. Let your heart be louder. She exhaled and nodded slightly, regaining her focus. The maestro's voice came again, softer this time. "Whenever you're ready." Elena nodded once. "I'm ready now." She pressed the first note, gentle, trembling, but clear. Then another, then another. The sound floated through the air, delicate but full of feeling. The melody began to form, slow and hauntingly beautiful. The audience stopped moving. The man who had been walking to the door paused and turned back. Even the maestro's fingers twitched slightly, as if his body remembered the joy of music long forgotten. Elena's small hands moved gracefully, almost dancing across the piano. Her blindfold didn't matter anymore. Her world was made of sound, touch, and memory. Every note was a heartbeat, every pause a breath. And though she couldn't see it, tears shimmered in her mother's eyes in the front row. The challenge had begun, not between teacher and student, but between doubt and faith. The first note echoed softly across the golden hall like a drop of rain falling into still water. It was a single trembling sound, but it carried emotion, raw, fragile, and alive. The audience didn't move. Every ear, every breath seemed to lean toward the piano. Elena's fingers hesitated for a moment after that first note. She could feel her pulse racing in her chest. Her hands were small and the keys felt bigger than they ever had before, but she remembered her father's words. The first note is the hardest. After that, the music will take your hand and lead the way. So she let the music lead. The second note came, then the third, and soon a soft melody began to fill the air. It was Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, a song full of both sadness and light. The notes rose gently like a voice whispering through a dream. At first, the sound was shaky, uncertain. A few people in the crowd exchanged doubtful looks. "She's nervous," someone murmured. "She'll miss a key soon." But the mistake never came. Instead, the music grew steadier. Her hands began to move more freely, finding the rhythm that lived in her heart. The blindfold no longer felt heavy. It was just there, like a forgotten shadow. From where he stood, Maestro Laurent watched closely. He expected to see confusion, hesitation, but what he saw was something different. Her fingers moved with grace, each one landing exactly where it should. Her body swayed slightly with the music, not in show, but in pure feeling. He frowned. Was this luck? Or something deeper? Elena, lost in her own world, was no longer thinking about the crowd or the maestro. In her mind, she was home again, sitting on the old wooden bench by the window. The sunlight fell on the piano, and her father sat beside her, smiling. "Slower here," he would say softly, guiding her hand to the right note. "Let it breathe." So she did. She slowed, letting each note linger just long enough to make hearts ache. A woman in the second row covered her mouth, her eyes glistening. The man beside her whispered, "She's playing like she's crying through her fingers." Even the maestro felt something shift inside him. For years he had trained his students to play perfectly, but never emotionally. He taught them technique, not tenderness. Yet this blindfolded child was expressing more truth through her trembling hands than most professionals could in a lifetime. Elena's mother sat in the front row, hands clasped tightly together. She wanted to cry, but she didn't want to distract her daughter. She could see the tiny movements of Elena's. shoulders as she breathed with each phrase. Every note reminded her of her late husband, the man who had passed on his love for music to their child. The hall, which had once been full of whispers and doubt, now seemed to hold its breath. Even the chandeliers seemed to glow brighter, their reflections shimmering on the polished floor. The melody swelled, rising like a wave. Elena's fingers danced over the keys, graceful and confident. The audience could almost feel the story she was telling, the story of a little girl who had lost someone she loved, but found him again in every sound she created. Her right hand moved fast now, playing delicate trills and runs. Her left hand followed with deep, resonant chords that filled the air like thunder beneath the rain. The music grew stronger, and the once skeptical Maestro took an unconscious step forward. For the first time that evening, his eyes softened. The lines on his face seemed to fade slightly. He didn't blink. He couldn't. Something about the way she played touched a place inside him he had long buried, the part that used to love music before rules. Fame and pride had taken over. When Elena reached the middle of the piece, she took a deep breath. Her shoulders relaxed. She tilted her head slightly as if listening to something beyond the notes. The audience could almost hear her heartbeat in the pauses between chords. One wrong move could ruin everything, but she didn't think about that. She didn't think at all. She felt. Her fingers flowed over the keys like water over stones. Each sound was alive, gentle, sad, then suddenly full of hope. The melody painted pictures in people's minds. Some saw a child in a storm, others saw a reunion, a memory, or even their own heartbreak. Music has a way of finding what words can't reach, and in that moment it reached everyone. When she reached the high note near the end of the phrase, she pressed it with such care that it seemed to float in the air forever before fading into silence. For a heartbeat, there was nothing, no sound, no movement. Then came the next phrase, soft and beautiful, like an apology whispered in the dark. The Maestro closed his eyes briefly. He didn't want to admit it, but she was perfect. Too perfect for someone her age. He had seen students twice her age struggle with this very piece. But this blindfolded girl was making it seem effortless, and yet it wasn't perfection that stunned him. It was honesty. As she approached the end of the section, Elena slowed her pace. The final notes of the passage rang out, pure and bright. The audience stayed silent, afraid to break the spell. Her hands lifted off the keys gently, hovering in the air for a moment as if saying goodbye to the sound she had created. Then she placed them back, preparing for the next part. The Maestro exhaled slowly, realizing he had been holding his breath the entire time. He turned slightly toward the audience, seeing their faces, eyes wide, mouths parted, hearts full. This wasn't a performance anymore. It was something deeper, something sacred. And as Elena continued, her music began to do the impossible. It silenced doubt itself. As the music continued, something magical began to happen, not just on stage but inside everyone's hearts. The girl who had started shy and nervous was no longer the same. Elena had changed. Her trembling fingers were now strong and confident. Her back was straight, her head slightly tilted, and her whole body moved with the rhythm of the song. It was as if the piano itself had become alive under her touch. Every note she played seemed to carry a piece of her soul. The hall that once buzzed with doubt was now silent, completely still, as though the world outside had stopped to listen. The melody grew deeper, richer. The soft opening had turned into something powerful. Elena's fingers no longer searched for the keys, they knew them. Her hands moved gracefully across the keyboard, painting emotions with sound. Her mother could hardly believe what she was seeing. The same little girl who once hid behind her when strangers spoke was now commanding the attention of hundreds. Tears welled in her eyes, but she smiled. She could see the spirit of her late husband in their daughter. His same calmness, his same gentle movements when he played. The Maestro stood motionless, his baton forgotten in his hand. He had begun the night certain that this child would fail, yet now he couldn't look away. There was something in her performance that felt beyond training or technique. It was pure, it was real. He had taught countless students over the years, but none had ever played like this. Not because they couldn't, but because they didn't dare to feel so deeply. He realized she wasn't following the notes exactly as written. She was interpreting them. She played with small changes in tempo, soft pauses and gentle flourishes, as though speaking through music instead of words, and yet every change felt right, natural, like a heartbeat. A man in the audience, a music critic known for his harsh reviews, sat frozen with his pen midair. He had come ready to write a scathing report about the blindfolded child stunt, but now he couldn't even take notes. His eyes were wide, and for the first time in years he felt moved. Elena was no longer aware of the audience. In her mind, the hall had vanished. She was back in her small living room, where her father used to sit beside her, humming softly as she played. She could almost hear him now, his warm voice saying, "That's it, my little star. Let the song tell its own story." Her breathing matched the rhythm of the piece. Every inhale and exhale blended with the flow of sound. Her fingers raced through the fast passages effortlessly, gliding from one end of the piano to the other. When she reached the softer parts, she slowed down, touching each note as gently as a falling feather. The blindfold stayed firmly tied, but it didn't matter. Her world was sound and feeling. The melody reached its middle section, full of passion and movement. It was the emotional heart of the piece, and Elena played it as though she was living inside it. Her small body leaned forward, then back, following the rise and fall of the music. The golden light from the chandeliers reflected on the piano lid, shining softly on her hair like a halo. The audience could feel it too. Some wiped tears quietly. Others just stared, completely lost in the performance. Even the air in the hall seemed to vibrate with emotion. Maestro Laurent took a slow step closer, drawn in despite himself. He could see how her fingers curved perfectly, how her wrists stayed loose, how she breathed with every note. But what struck him most was her expression. Even though her eyes were covered, her face was full of life. It was peaceful yet intense, like she was both fragile and powerful at once. He felt something break inside him, something he hadn't felt in decades. It was humility. This girl, who had no formal stage experience, no spotlight training, was reminding him why he had loved music in the first place. He had forgotten that feeling long ago, replaced by pride and pressure. But now, watching her, he realized that true music wasn't about showing perfection. It was about showing truth. As the music swelled, Elena's emotions poured out of her like sunlight through a window. She wasn't playing to impress anyone. She was playing to express everything she couldn't say. The pain of missing her father, the comfort of her mother's love, the courage she found within herself. The transformation was complete. The timid girl who had walked onto the stage was gone. In her place was an artist, strong, fearless, and free. The maestro's eyes glistened. He blinked rapidly and looked away, embarrassed by his own emotion. But it was too late. The music had reached him. The climax of the piece approached. Elena's hands moved faster now, running across the keys with fire and precision. The energy in the hall rose. The audience could feel the tension building, waiting for the moment when everything would explode into sound. Then suddenly the music softened again. The notes turned tender, almost like a lullaby. It felt like she was speaking directly to her father, saying goodbye, but with peace in her heart. A tear slipped down her cheek beneath the blindfold, catching the golden light as it fell. Her mother gasped quietly but didn't move. She knew what that tear meant. The maestro took a deep breath. He whispered under his breath, "Magnifique." When the section ended, Elena's hands hovered above the keys for a second, frozen in the air, before gently landing again to begin the next part. The audience was still silent. No one dared to even clap between sections. They were spellbound. In that moment, Maestro Laurent knew something that humbled him completely. The challenge he had set to test the girl had transformed him instead. Elena had not only changed the mood of the hall, she had changed hearts. And as the next part began, it was clear that this was no longer a test of skill. It was a moment of truth. The air inside the hall felt charged, like electricity waiting to strike. Every heartbeat in rhythm with Elena's music. The once quiet audience now sat frozen, unable to blink, afraid that even a breath might break the spell she had created. The soft glow from the chandeliers shimmered above her, and the piano gleamed under the golden light as her fingers began the most difficult passage of the entire piece. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for, the part that would decide whether she would rise or fall. The final section of the nocturne wasn't just complex, it was merciless. The keys moved faster. The melody intertwined with sharp changes in tempo, and a single mistake could shatter the entire illusion. Even seasoned pianists avoided this piece for public performance. But Elena didn't hesitate. Her fingers moved like silver birds across the keys. Every note came alive, every chord thundered with emotion. Maestro Laurent leaned forward unconsciously, his lips parted. His baton hung loosely in his hand. He had seen this piece played 100 times, but never like this. Each note seemed to carry a story, a storm of emotions, then moments of calm, like waves crashing and pulling back again. The audience could feel her struggle. Her little shoulders trembled, not from fear, but from effort. She poured everything she had into the music, her strength, her pain, her love. It wasn't just a performance anymore. It was a conversation with something beyond herself. The melody rose higher and higher, climbing like a voice reaching for the heavens. Then it dropped suddenly into a whisper of soft, aching notes. The sound was so tender that several people in the front row wiped their eyes. Her mother clutched her chest, whispering, "That's my girl. That's my brave little girl." But Elena didn't hear her. She was deep inside the music, completely unaware of the world around her. Her heart guided her hands now. She wasn't counting beats or reading patterns, she was feeling. The sweat on her forehead glistened under the lights. The blindfold pressed tightly against her skin, but she didn't care. She was lost in the storm of sound she had created, and then it happened. Her right hand slipped slightly, almost missing a key. The crowd gasped quietly. Even the maestro's stomach tightened in fear. But before the sound of worry could fill the air, she recovered, smoothly, gracefully, like nothing had happened. The missed note became part of the emotion, a tear in the perfect fabric that somehow made it even more human. It was no longer about perfection. It was about passion. The music began to build again, faster, louder, stronger. The grand piano shook under the power of her playing. Her fingers blurred, moving faster than the eye could follow. The audience could feel her energy, the fire in her movements. The once quiet child now played like a storm. The melody burned with power and light. It was as if all the sadness, all the doubt, all the pain of losing her father was pouring out through her fingertips. Maestro Laurent's throat tightened. He whispered to himself, "Incredible." His eyes glistened. For the first time in years, he didn't want to correct, to judge, or to teach. He just wanted to listen. Elena reached the heart of the climax, a furious series of arpeggios and trills that demanded perfect coordination. Her hands raced from one end of the piano to the other. Her left hand pounded deep, resonant bass notes while her right hand fluttered above, light as air. Then suddenly she slowed. The shift was so delicate, so unexpected, that the audience gasped again. From chaos came peace. The music melted into a soft, glowing calm, like the sky after thunder. The melody became a whisper, sad but beautiful, fragile but unbroken. And that's when something extraordinary happened. A single tear slipped from under Elena's blindfold and fell onto the piano keys. The drop landed silently, but its meaning was louder than any sound. The maestro saw it, so did her mother. So did everyone sitting near the front. The tear reflected the light from the chandeliers, a small, perfect diamond of emotion. She didn't wipe it away. She just kept playing. The music softened again, her fingers moving tenderly now, each note like a heartbeat. It was as if she was speaking directly to her father, telling him she missed him, that she loved him, that she was finally strong enough to play without fear. And perhaps, in some quiet corner of the universe, he was listening. The final run approached, the last test of her strength and focus. Her body leaned slightly forward. The audience leaned with her, holding their breath. Maestro Laurent felt every muscle in his body tighten. Then, she played it. Her hands moved like lightning, one last burst of energy, one final cry of emotion. The melody soared bright and wild until it reached its highest point, and then slowly descended note by note into silence. When the last sound faded, the world stood still. For several seconds, no one moved. Elena sat perfectly still, her hands resting gently on the keys. Her chest rose and fell slowly. The blindfold hid her eyes, but her expression was peaceful. The maestro blinked, realizing that tears were running down his own face. He didn't wipe them away. He looked at the small girl sitting at the piano and thought, she did it. She didn't just play the music, she became it. The silence stretched on, thick and powerful. Then somewhere in the back of the hall, someone whispered, "My God." And in the next moment, the room erupted. The applause began as a soft ripple and grew into a thunderstorm of sound. People stood from their seats, clapping, cheering, shouting. Some cried openly. Others just stared in disbelief. Elena lifted her hands from the piano and sat still as if waking from a dream. The sound of the applause reached her slowly, like waves crashing on a distant shore. She smiled faintly beneath the blindfold. The maestro stepped forward, his voice trembling. "Ladies and gentlemen," he stopped, unable to find words. He looked at her, this small, blindfolded girl who had just redefined music in his eyes, and whispered softly, "Bravo!" The applause grew louder, and for the first time, the maestro understood something he had forgotten long ago. Music wasn't about control or perfection. It was about truth. The last note faded into the air like a sigh that refused to end. The sound lingered, soft and trembling, before dissolving into silence. For a moment, no one moved. It was as if time itself had stopped inside the golden hall. The chandeliers sparkled quietly, and all that could be heard was Elena's soft breathing. Her small hands rested gently on the piano keys, frozen in place. She didn't move, didn't speak. Her chest rose and fell slowly, her body still trembling from the emotion of the music. The blindfold was still tied around her eyes, dark and tight, but she didn't try to remove it. She sat there, lost in that fragile moment between music and silence. The audience, hundreds of people, remained completely still. No one dared to clap yet. It felt wrong to interrupt the quiet that followed something so beautiful. The music had touched something deep inside every person in that room, something that words could never reach. Maestro Laurent stood by the side of the stage, staring at her as if he was seeing music for the first time. His lips parted slightly, but he couldn't speak. His baton, once so commanding in his hand, now hung uselessly at his side. His heart was racing. He had witnessed perfection, but not the kind he had spent years chasing. This was something else. This was truth. Elena finally lifted her hands from the piano and let them fall softly into her lap. The warmth of the keys still lingered on her fingertips. She felt light, almost weightless. She didn't know what the audience was doing, or if they liked her performance. She only knew that she had given everything, every fear, every memory, every dream, to those notes. She whispered softly, so only she could hear, "I did it, Papa." Her mother, sitting in the front row, heard it faintly and pressed a hand over her heart. Tears streamed down her cheeks, but she smiled through them. Her little girl had done what no one thought possible. She had played from her soul. The silence stretched on for another long, powerful moment. The audience looked around at each other, eyes wide, some glistening with tears. The man who had mocked earlier, the one who said she would fail, was sitting straight in his chair, unable to meet anyone's eyes. His face was pale, and then finally, it happened. Someone in the back stood up and began to clap. Just once, clap. Then again, clap, clap. Slowly, others joined. Within seconds, the hall filled with thunderous applause, louder and louder, rising like a wave. People stood from their seats, cheering, clapping until their palms stung. The sound shook the hall, echoing off the marble walls. But Elena didn't move. She sat perfectly still, her head slightly bowed, the blindfold still covering her eyes. The noise around her was distant, muffled, as if coming from another world. Maestro Laurent stepped forward slowly. The applause grew even louder as he approached her. He could barely keep his composure. His throat tightened with emotion. He stopped beside her, looking down at the small, still figure. Then, in front of everyone, he did something no one expected. He knelt. He reached out gently and untied the blindfold from her eyes. The dark cloth slipped away, revealing her face, flushed, tear-streaked, glowing under the golden light. Her eyes blinked rapidly at the brightness, adjusting after so long in darkness. When she finally looked up at the maestro, he smiled softly, an honest, humble smile. "Forgive me," he said quietly, his voice trembling. "I doubted you." Elena looked confused at first. Then she smiled, a shy, small smile that lit up her face. "It's okay," she whispered. "I just wanted to play." The maestro felt his chest tighten. That simple sentence hit him harder than any criticism he had ever received. For years he had been chasing perfection, believing that discipline and control were the only path to greatness. But this little girl, blindfolded, trembling, brave, had shown him that music wasn't something to be controlled. It was something to be felt. He stood slowly and turned to the audience. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, his voice echoing through the hall. Tonight I have been reminded of what true music means. This young girl has taught me more in 10 minutes than I have learned in 30 years. The crowd erupted again, louder than before. Cheers filled the room. Some people even shouted her name, Elena, Elena, their voices full of admiration. Her mother stood too, clapping with all her strength. Her tears kept falling, but they were happy tears. She looked up at her daughter and whispered, "Your father would be so proud." Elena smiled faintly, her lips trembling. She looked out toward the crowd, though the bright lights blurred their faces. She couldn't see anyone clearly, but she didn't need to. She could feel their warmth, their hearts beating in rhythm with hers. The maestro placed a gentle hand on her shoulder and whispered, "Stand, my dear. The world is applauding you." She stood slowly, still unsure what to do. The applause grew even louder, echoing like thunder. She gave a small bow, her blue dress shimmering under the lights, and for that brief moment the world felt perfect. The maestro wiped his eyes discreetly and stepped back, letting her have the stage. He had started the night with pride in his chest, ready to prove a point. Now that pride was replaced with something far greater, humility and awe. The applause went on until finally it began to fade. The people slowly sat down, still buzzing with emotion. Some still wiped tears. Others just smiled silently, grateful they had been there to witness something unforgettable. When the last claps died away, silence returned to the hall. But it was a different silence this time. It wasn't cold or doubtful. It was warm, peaceful, full of respect. Elena stood by the piano, her small hands clasped together, her face calm and shining. The music was over, but its echo would live in every heart that had heard it. And in that silence, Maestro Laurent finally understood something profound. Sometimes, the most powerful sound in music isn't a note, it's the silence that follows. The applause slowly faded, but the magic in the air remained. People sat down again, still whispering, still moved. The golden hall, moments ago alive with clapping and cheers, was now filled with soft murmurs of wonder. Elena stood quietly by the piano, her small hands clasped together, her chest rising and falling as she caught her breath. Maestro Laurent stood beside her, still stunned. He had seen prodigies before. He had heard flawless performances. But what he had just witnessed wasn't just music, it was something spiritual. It was truth in its purest form. He turned to her gently and said, "You've done more tonight than just play. You've reminded us what music truly is." Elena tilted her head, her voice barely above a whisper. "Did I do well?" The maestro smiled softly. "You did more than well. You showed us the soul behind the sound." Her mother came onto the stage, tears glistening in her eyes. She ran to her daughter and wrapped her in a tight embrace. "My baby," she whispered, "you did it." "You really did it," Elena smiled shyly. "I felt like Dad was with me, Mom. Like he was right beside me, helping me play." Her mother pressed her forehead against Elena's and whispered, "He was, sweetheart." I'm sure he was. The audience watched the tender moment, and even the maestro had to turn away for a second to hide the lump in his throat. When Elena finally turned back to the piano, she ran her hand gently along the keys one last time, almost like saying goodbye. The cold ivory felt warm now, alive. She whispered softly, "Thank you," as if the instrument could hear her. Maestro Laurent took a slow step forward, his expression thoughtful. "Elena," he said, "would you allow me to ask you something?" She looked up, her eyes wide and curious. "Yes, sir?" He smiled faintly. "How did you do it? How did you play so perfectly without seeing a single note?" Elena thought for a moment before replying. "I didn't try to play perfectly, sir. I just tried to tell a story." The maestro froze. Her words struck him like lightning. "I just tried to tell a story." He realized then that he had spent his entire life chasing technical perfection, counting beats, correcting students, polishing performances, yet he had forgotten that music was meant to speak, not just impress. For the first time in many years he felt humble, truly humble. He lowered himself slightly, kneeling so he could look her in the eyes. "You've taught me something tonight, Elena," he said quietly. "All my life I've been the teacher, but tonight I am the student." Elena looked confused for a moment, then smiled sweetly. "We both love music, sir. Maybe music teaches everyone." The maestro chuckled softly, wiping a tear from the corner of his eye. "Yes, perhaps it does." The crowd began to rise again, clapping softly now. A gentle applause, not the loud thunder from before, but one filled with respect. Elena looked toward the back of the hall, unable to see faces clearly through the bright lights, but she could feel the warmth of their appreciation. She gave a small bow, her blue dress glowing under the chandeliers. Her mother held her hand tightly, and the maestro placed his hand on her shoulder. Together, the three of them stood under the golden lights, an image that would stay in everyone's memory for years to come. Later that evening, after the hall had emptied and the chairs were being stacked, Maestro Laurent sat alone at the edge of the stage. The piano was closed now, silent once more. He looked at it and smiled faintly. He thought about all the years he had spent chasing applause, trophies, and reputation. He realized how many times he had silenced a student's creativity in the name of perfection. Tonight had reminded him that music wasn't about control. It was about release. He whispered to himself, "She taught me more in one night than I learned in a lifetime." At that moment, he made a quiet promise to teach differently, to let his students feel again, to let them be brave like Elena. Outside the hall, the night was calm. The stars shimmered gently above, and the moonlight bathed the courtyard in silver. Elena and her mother walked together under the night sky, holding hands. "Mom," Elena said softly, "do you think Dad was watching?" Her mother squeezed her hand. "Yes, my love, and I think he's smiling right now." Elena smiled. "Then I played for him right." They stopped for a moment under the moonlight. Her mother looked at her daughter, the brave, blindfolded girl who had silenced an entire hall, and felt her heart swell with pride. "You didn't just play for him," she said softly. "You played for everyone who's ever needed hope." Elena looked up at the sky, her eyes bright. "Maybe that's what music is," she said quietly. "Hope you can hear." Back inside, Maestro Laurent stood one last time at the piano. He placed his hand gently on the lid and whispered, "Hope you can hear. Yes, that's it." He looked out at the empty seats and smiled. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about his next concert or his next award. He was thinking about that small girl with a blindfold and a heart full of courage. And as he turned off the last light in the hall, he whispered to the darkness, "Thank you, Helena." The piano stood in silence, but it wasn't an empty silence anymore. It was full, alive, with the echo of her music, her story, her truth. That night, the world outside continued as usual, but inside that hall, something had changed forever. A lesson had been learned, a heart had been healed, and a legacy had been born, because sometimes the smallest hands create the greatest miracles, and sometimes the people we expect to fail end up teaching us how to truly see.